Welcome and thank you for joining us on this holiday week. My name is John Mathewson and I'm the president of Keologic. We are a FileMaker Platinum partner located in Westport, Connecticut. Our main territories are servicing the Southern Connecticut and New England regions. I'm joined today by Tim Neudecker, who is our Chief Technology Officer and who will be our main presenter today. Our topic is an interesting one. It's how to improve the performance of your FileMaker solutions. Tim has 7 tips that he has put together that will help you have a more responsive user experience with your applications. Why do we need this? In today's solutions, we find that solutions are growing tremendously in complexity, and it reflects the power of FileMaker. We're finding that solutions today contain more data, richer data, more extended data, and that we're also finding that the interfaces themselves are becoming more interesting, with graphs, web interfaces, and live statistics included. All of these things put greater demands on your solution to make sure the performance is up to standard. A second thing that's happening is that we're seeing more extended applications, including the integration of documents and integration with other applications. Both of these things also put more demands on your processor and more expectations from the user that they have a responsive and snappy experience. A second very important trend is the fact that now we're finding that more and more people are accessing their applications through the internet and through cloud computing. These also place greater WAN performance on your system and require that proper techniques are put in place. And a final thing is that we find that user acceptance is very much based upon what people get out of their applications. And having a responsive and snappy system will improve tremendously their experience using your application. Today's session is the 3rd session in the FM Academy workshops, and we are pleased to bring those to you. This year we formed the FM Academy, which is a consortium of 7 like-minded FileMaker development companies. You can see them on the screen in front of you. That are all Platinum Business Alliance partners and are committed to promoting best practices in FileMaker to users across the country. You'll see that at the end we'll have a slide, and you'll see that almost all regions of the country are covered by the FM Academy members. And we're all independent developers and are not in any way related to FileMaker itself. But we felt it was very important for us to spread best practices and information about the product because it's something that is near and dear to us all and forms a very important part of our businesses. The session that we're going to be doing today, as we said, is one in a series, and what we intend to do is continue throughout the year to put on presentations roughly monthly. The next presentation, you might want to mark your calendar, and we will repeat this at the end, is going to be on January the 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when our partner in Philadelphia, IT Solutions, will make the presentation on playing nice with others, FileMaker and content management systems. That will be a topic talking about integrating with third-party systems and doing it effectively with FileMaker. It should be very valuable. Once again, that will be on January the 18th at 2 p.m. Before we move to our topic, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question for Tim, please type it into the console on your panel. There is a question console, and all you have to do is type it in and submit it, and our moderators will take your information and make sure that it gets to him. At time permitting, at the end of the session, we will conduct a question and answer period. We've planned for that, and we look forward to hearing your submissions and getting answers from Tim. If after the session or at any point you don't feel that we've addressed your question, please you can send an email at any time to info@keologic.com, and we'll make sure that your information is routed to any one of the FM Academy members. So before we get going, let's talk a little bit about our speaker. Tim is someone I've known for a long time and is a partner here at Keologic and also our Chief Technology Officer. Tim is a highly knowledgeable FileMaker developer and has always had a love of the product and a deep understanding of its capabilities. He's been certified in all the versions since FileMaker 7, since certification was introduced, and he was proficient prior to that and passed all the proficiency exams prior to that. He has published articles on performance tuning in FileMaker Advisor magazine. He has spoken at DevCon on performance tuning, and he's also a regular speaker and go-to person in developer conferences, developer groups in our area, and is in fact a founding member of both the New York and Connecticut FileMaker developer groups. Last but not least, Tim is a FileMaker Excellence Award winner for his contributions to the community. So with that in mind, and relying on Tim's expertise, we'll turn to our topic, 7 tips to improve performance of your FileMaker application. Tim?
Thank you, John. First, I'd like to go over our agenda today and learn a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start by talking about what makes FileMaker Pro slow, learn the things that we need to avoid, and see what our tips will be addressing. And those tips will revolve around changing our cache settings on server and client, modifying the schema within our solutions, making calculations faster, eliminating unstored fields, and then my favorite tip of all, using server-side scripts. And there will also be a question and answer period at the end. So what makes your FileMaker Pro solution slow? I think unstored fields are the biggest killer of performance in FileMaker Pro today. It's so easy to make a calculation that references related data, sums up data 3 or 4 relations away, and you add lots of these fields to your layouts, and every time you render a layout, you're slowing down your solution and your users are feeling it. And then when your users try to access your database remotely, they really start to feel the pain of these unstored fields. The next issue are poorly written calculations, people not taking advantage of the let function or the predicate order in FileMaker Pro. Then slow scripts. People have written scripts that may do too many steps or aren't taking advantage of blank layouts and other things that can make them faster. Sometimes it's as simple as having too much information on the screen at once. It's very easy to make a kitchen sink single layout for every user in your system, and it's great because you only have one layout as a developer to maintain, but for your users, every time they go to that layout, it has to render all of that data and calculate all of those unstored fields. And the next thing is slow hardware. And this tends to be the low-hanging fruit that a lot of developers say, oh, we need a faster server, we need a faster computer for this user. And increasing people's computer speeds and server speeds will not make as big of a performance difference as possibly replacing one unstored field that's used a lot and making it stored. That can make a larger difference than a hardware improvement. But hardware improvements can improve your speed as well. So the first tip we're going to talk about today is letting FileMaker Pro stretch its legs. Give it the memory you have. Just about every computer sold today used in office space has 4 gigabytes of RAM. Let's use that memory. So if you open up the Preferences dialog in the FileMaker Pro client application and go to the Memory tab, the default setting of FileMaker Pro 11 is 64 megabytes. Let's turn that all the way up to its maximum, the 256 megabytes. And this will let the FileMaker Pro client on the user's desktop hold more information in memory and use its scratch space less and have to refer to the server less often, thereby speeding things up. And you probably see the effects of this when you work over a WAN. When you load the list view of all those records, it takes a long time the first time you go to that layout, but then you'll notice the next time you go to that layout it's very fast. Well, you can make that experience larger and remember more layouts and more record sets and indexes by increasing your RAM cache. So if you've got the memory, turn it up. This will make a difference for you. And just like on our client application, we can turn up the memory on the server. When we go into the console on our server admin page, you'll see that you can turn the memory up to a maximum of 800 megabytes. So if you open up your admin console and you go to the database server area, at the bottom you'll see the RAM cache settings, and we can zoom in on those here. And the maximum you can set this to is 800 megabytes, but FileMaker Pro will tell you how much memory your computer has available to move this up. Now you'll see my example only shows I could set it to a maximum of 479 megabytes. This is because it's from a virtual machine that was only given
2 megabytes of RAM. So I have it on a low setting here for a very good reason, but I have yet to find somebody else who can give me a reason not to set it 800 megabytes. Memory is very inexpensive today, and your server will make use of it. So for the rest of the demo, I'd like to step out of PowerPoint and actually work within FileMaker Pro and show you some live demos. So our second tip today is going to be talking about schema differences that you can make to improve your performance. What I have is a database that has the complete plays of Shakespeare. And you can see the plays going down in the list view. And then the number over here is how many characters are stored in that play. We have two main data fields. We have the name of the play right here, and then we have the text of the play, which is the entire script for the play. And you can see this script takes 145K of data. The entire database takes about 5 megabytes. Now, why is this important? What's going on? Well, let's go back to our list. With FileMaker Pro, when you load a record, if you show any field from a record, the FileMaker server has to send the client the entire record, including the fields that you don't show. The only exception to this are container fields. FileMaker Pro is smart enough now in version 11 to not send the container fields unless they're requested. But what this means to us is when we have a list view with all of these plays, just to get the name of that play in the list view, I had to send 138K. And this one I had to send 149K. So I had to send a total of 5 megabytes of data from my server to my client application just to load this list view. And that can be very slow, especially if you're working over a WAN connection or even a 3G connection, which can be real slow. So how can we make this better? Well, we can chop our table in two. And what do I mean by that? We have two data fields. I've done, to speed this up, I placed each field in a separate table and created one-to-one relationships between the two. So now, when we load the title of the play, we're only sending the characters in the title. But if I go in and look at the whole play, now I have sent 171K to load that. So let's go back and let's look at this from a programmer's point of view and see how this was done. So the first thing we'll look at, we will go to the wide table, I call it, because we have lots of fields. And we have our title right here, and then we have the text of the play field right here. But remember, whenever we show the title, FileMaker Pro also has to send all of the data in that text field to the client. So when we look at the relationship graph, we see that we have the single table right here. You can ignore this gray one. That's just part of the UI to do that nice portal cascading you saw. But we can split that table into two tables and make a one-to-one relationship via the primary key of the parent. And let's look at the fields for that. So here's the parent. You can see we removed the text field. So we just have the title here. And then we made a new table with the text of the play. And it has the text. I have some background calcs to calculate how big it is. And then we have that foreign key. And so when we do that, we tremendously speed up our list views when we go in and look at them. So it's a great way to save a lot of room and to speed things up. We applied this to a solution just this year for a company in Boston. They had a large project management system, and they were adding tremendous amounts of metadata describing the project. This is data the users would never search on or sort on, but it was scripts for commercials, large commercial briefs and campaign briefs about advertising campaigns, and it was all related to the project, and they had it all in the project table. And it was fine and dandy for the first year or two of use, but then they started getting users outside the office, WAN users, specifically in Australia, about as far away as you can get from their servers in Boston. and things were unbearably slow. Just to open the system and go to a list view in projects was taking 4 to 5 minutes, because when I went to that list view, it was having to load all of that metadata that the user was never going to use. And it was very slow. So we chopped their project table into, I believe, 3 or 4 other tables and sped things up dramatically for them. And it took a minimal amount of work, a little bit of layout work to change the fields. And now the system is being used by folks in other countries, and they're very happy. So it's a great technique to manage that. So I want to put that away. And the next thing we're going to talk about is short-circuiting, the FileMaker Pro calculation engine. I have a list view with some slow calculations. I'm going to let this recalc, just see what's going on. This calculation evaluates to a timestamp and rolls down the screen, so we can see that as I scroll through this list view, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm getting beach balls right now, and you can see it evaluate. So whenever FileMaker Pro tries to calculate an unstored field, it will do it whenever it is displayed on screen. So as I scroll, FileMaker has to recalculate all the fields that are shown that are unstored on the screen. And we can see that I can get about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fields calculated a second. So this calculation takes about 1/20th of a second to run. We don't have that many records in here, but it's very slow. So let's take a look at that calculation. And I basically tried to make the most complex calculation I could to slow FileMaker down so this demo would work well. And so I used the set precision function to take FileMaker Pro's math engine out to 400 decimal places, and then I did a bunch of crunching on a number. And then we have a logical function of an and I'm anding it with 1 equals 0. And that's always going to equal 0. This is where FileMaker Pro gets to be smart. FileMaker Pro can, as it goes across the calculation, look at that logic and say, hey, anything anded with 0 is always 0. But FileMaker Pro, in doing its work, starts over here on the left and works its way across, doing this predicate first, then this predicate, which gives it this result, and then it sees the and. So what if we change the order of our predicates around that and function, as I have in this calculation? All I've done, the only difference in this calculation from the previous one, is I've moved the 1 equals 0 before the and put the complex slow function after the and. So now FileMaker Pro says, hey, this evaluates to 0. Now I see an and. I know anything anded with 0 always equals 0. So FileMaker Pro is smart enough not to even try to evaluate this. And this also goes for an OR function, where anything ORed with a 1 will equal 1. So it does some great short circuiting. Now let's look at the actual performance difference that makes. I'm going to go forward one screen. Look at that. It did the whole list view. I can scroll through the list view as fast as I want now, and I'm getting the same results just by changing the order of precedence in my calculations. So taking a look at your calculations can really help you speed things up. Let me go ahead and close that one up. Okay, our next demo file, we're going to talk about unstored fields much more specifically now. We're going to take a look at our first slow layout. I have a database. This database, let's actually look at the structure before we move in. We have a parent record. I have 25 records in that table. The parent has children records. Each parent has about 100 children records. What is that? Those are 1,000. I'm sorry, about 1,000 child records. And then each child has many grandchild records. And so if we look at this in the relationship graph, we'll see we have parents. Parents have children, and children have grandchildren. And when we look at the fields, I have a random number being placed into each of these fields at the grandchild level and the child level. But I also have a sum of the child records rolling up through our schema. So when we get to the parent, we have a sum of the sums. So this can be very slow. We see this a lot in inventory systems, invoicing systems, where you have a lot of line items and it looks down into product tables. So we can see these child records, and when I try to scroll through, there I am getting that great beach ball again, and the scrolling is very chunky as FileMaker tries to evaluate those unstored fields. You can see how slow that is, and if we want, we can pick one of these records. We can show its child records. We can change one of them. Close that window. And when we go back up, we can see the numbers have to recalculate. So these are all live numbers going through there. So what can we do to make this faster? Well, the first thing I would suggest is setting up a script trigger. So what we've done, we've taken that slow summary field, that calculation field that uses the sum function, and summarized all those records from the child and grandchild, and we replaced it with just a number field. Good old-fashioned stored number field. And then on the child record, we've placed a script trigger. So if I edit that record and I close this and I come back, we can see it's already recalculated. If I turn on my script debugger, okay, let me pull up the child record first. Turn on my script debugger. When I edit one of these records, as soon as I commit that record, on record commit, recalc this child record script gets fired. And it simply does set fields to set those records to the correct values now the child record has changed. So in effect, the math is only being done when data is edited, instead of being done every time data is viewed. And this can make tremendous improvements in performance, but not just in your list view scrolling, but for finds and sorts. What if you wanted to do other stuff with this data? Maybe you want to graph the sum of children. That graph, if you were using unstored fields, would be tremendously slow. So we've now sped a lot of stuff up, and it makes things wonderful. So I highly recommend using script triggers. The one caveat to doing this technique is you may be working with a legacy system and you don't know every layout or even have control of every layout as a developer that data could be edited on. So you don't have access to all the locations to place those script triggers and do that. So what I like to do in that case is place a recalc button on the layout along with a timestamp, and in effect you are the script trigger. You can click that button when you want to recalculate that value, and I like to then put a timestamp so that the user will know how old is this information. Is it stale? Should I recalculate it? And you can whip through and do these. Now this can get old, so sometimes you can create your own script to recalc all records and run that, and it simply pops a hidden utility window, the script runs through, and it does a recalc on every record. So you can do that periodically and speed things up. And again, you get the timestamps to see when this is done. So as you can see, it takes quite a while to run this, which leads us right into our next tip for speeding up your FileMaker solution, is you don't necessarily want your users having to think about, do I need to recalculate this data? That can be bad. So what we can do, when FileMaker Server 10 came out, we received the ability to run scripts server-side. And with a server-side script, this can happen every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes. You can have this data recalculated depending on how often you need it. Maybe your invoice lines are only changed once or twice an hour, so you could run this script once an hour. Maybe you have hundreds of orders coming into your system throughout the day. You could run it every 10 minutes. So let's talk about how we would run the server-side script. I'm going to open up this script for us. When you're writing a script to run server-side, you need to take into consideration that the server cannot perform any functions that involve the user interface. So down at the bottom, we have the Show Compatibility option. I will select Server, and you'll see that several script steps that involve user interaction disappear from the list. Preview mode. There's nobody on a server to see preview mode. Insert picture involves a field on a layout so it knows where to insert it. So you can see which fields, but not very many of them disappear. They're mostly UI oriented. All the standard script steps that we need for 90% of our scripts are here. The set field command, the if command, the loop, all those powerful functions are there. Go to layout. And as you can see, the script I've written doesn't use any of the illegal scripts for server, and it simply shows all records in the child blank, loops through them, performing the recalc this child record, and exits after last. And that's it. Now let's talk about how do we get this script on our server. I happen to have a server available right here, and this demo file is on the server. So I'm going to go to the Schedules option, and I'm going to select the Create Schedule. And it's actually pretty easy. FileMaker's made a nice wizard for us. I'm going to select the Run Script option, hit Next, and we're going to run a FileMaker Pro script. And then we have to select what file we want to run the script from. And then you have to give an account that is valid for that file. FileMaker Pro will validate your user account and then show you all the scripts that you, as that user, are privileged to run. And in this case, here's our list. I'm going to select the recalc all records. If we needed a script parameter for that script, we could place that right here. Hit Next. And this is an important option. This is setting the time limit for a script. You may have a bug in your script. You have no way to run a script debugger when your script is running on the server. So you might have a runaway script that gets into an endless loop, and that would be a bad thing because that script would never end until you stop the server. So we can set a limit for our script. I know this script on my machine normally takes about 20 seconds to run, so 10 minutes is probably a pretty good indicator that the script has run away. And then I'm going to tell FileMaker Pro at the end of that 10 minutes, go ahead and kill that schedule. Okay? Go to our next one. Then we can tell it how often to run. In this case, I'm going to run this once an hour. And I'm going to do it during business hours, but we have some folks who come in early, so I'll set that for 8 a.m. Next. And then we get the name, recalc values. Oops. Name our script. And I don't wish to be emailed every time this script runs. Hit Next. And we can see a summary of all the options we just selected. Hit Finish, and now we have a server-side script that will do that for us. So if I say Run Schedule Now and hit Perform, we'll actually see that script running, and those values will all be updated back in FileMaker Pro. So we find this to be very powerful. We have a client who has a very large inventory system with literally hundreds of thousands of invoices with many line items per invoice. And their inventory numbers can be very slow to calculate because they have, I think, almost 10 years worth of data in their system. So we went in there and we wrote some script triggers that would recalculate these inventory numbers for them, took them to number fields. And now when FileMaker Pro recalculates, it used to take literally a client machine to run that script about an hour to recalculate the entire inventory. The server could do it on FileMaker 10 in about 20 minutes, and now with a new server in FileMaker Server 11, that same script, no changing to the programming, runs server-side in under 10 minutes. And so they have their inventory recalculated. I believe they do it every 30 minutes or so. And their people never have to hit their update buttons anymore to check their inventory numbers. It's all crunching on the server. You can also write server-side scripts that run long reports. Maybe you have a slow AR report that might take an hour or two to run. You can have the server run that report, save it off to PDF, and then email it to the users. So when they come into the office in the morning, there's their reports in their mailbox waiting for them. And the server's done it after hours, and everything's great. So server-side scripts are very much your friend. Okay, we have one more option we can do with slow unstored fields. As we see right here, here's that fast static field with the recalc button we were talking about before. Remember, FileMaker Pro only evaluates these unstored fields when they are shown on screen. So if I hide that slow field behind a tab, it doesn't evaluate, and I can flip through the records nice and fast. Whereas if I go to the slow tab and I try to click, it takes it that half second to do the calculation. And where this could be handy is if you have some legacy layouts and you still have a ton of slow fields there that you can't make fast for whatever reason. Maybe they're actual summary fields, summing up or record counts or averages of a found set. You can hide those fields behind tabs or even put them on a separate layout. So you could have a fast layout and a slow layout, and then show the appropriate layout or tab when those numbers need to be viewed by the people who need them. Because what you'll find is while people will find those numbers are very important and they have to have them, they don't need them all the time. So folks tend not to worry too much about, oh, I need that number, let me hit a recalc button, or let me change to the tab that shows those slower numbers. And then they're only evaluating when they actually need that information. So it's a great way to keep those under wraps. Okay, so we have a little bit extra time. I want to show one more bonus tip today. That was actually our 7th tip. And I'm going to go into Manage Scripts again. I just want to show you the script I used to create these 2.5 million records that are in this sample file. And it's basically just 3 nested loops. But the technique we used to create these, we went to a blank form view layout. And I absolutely love this tip. I learned this from Mark Richmond at Skeleton Key last year at DevCon. I had always used the freeze window, and I would always go to my utility layouts that I had as a developer that would have all the fields in the system on it. And it is amazing how much faster looping through records is in a form view with no fields. Remember, you don't need fields on a layout to operate on them. You can do your set fields and all your functions other than, I think, copy, cut, paste, and insert, which most folks don't use these days anyway in their scripts. So, I mean, it can make a tremendous improvement in the speed of your looping scripts by going to these blank layouts. Let me just show you one of those layouts in the system. I just put them down here at the bottom. I like to put a box there so I know I have a record that I'm not accidentally in a list view. And it's just literally a blank layout with no data, but it has the layout table occurrence assigned to it for the parent table. So the layout still gives our script the context to access the fields that it needs to access. So that wraps that up for the presentation. Let me pull back to our slides. 1 second, please. Here we go. So a quick review of the 7 tips we went through today. First thing, make sure you turn up the memory on your cache settings on both client and server. Very important. It'll give FileMaker the room it needs to stretch its legs and to do the work you're asking it to do. Remember, you can take your tables that are wide and make them narrow with one-to-one relationships to prevent loading of data that you don't need to load all the time. Okay, you can still use that data, you can still search on and sort on it. It will be a little bit slower if it's related, so you have to think carefully about which data you place in this related field, but it can make things much faster for your list views. Don't forget about the order of events and short-circuiting in the calculation engine. How you write your calculation is very important. And one of the great ways to work with that is the let function. I mean, we didn't go into it in detail, but it's one of my favorite functions in FileMaker Pro. And it allows you to define temporary variables within a calculation so you don't re-evaluate things that might be slow. You can define them one time and then use them many times. They're great. Then we talked about using script triggers so that we can get rid of unstored fields and make them stored. without the users ever noticing that it's happening. And if you're leery of script triggers or you have a old system, you can create a recalc button and still use the technique to reevaluate the values and get rid of those slow unstored calculations. Sometimes you're stuck, you have to have slow fields, maybe they're summaries or whatever, but you can hide them. Remember, they're only evaluated when they're shown on screen. And then another way to do your fast recalcs or slow reports are the server-side scripts. And those have probably made one of the biggest differences in systems that I've worked on in the last 2 years. Server-side scripts have made tremendous improvements in performance, because the server is typically the fastest computer in the office. So use that heavy iron, let it do the work. And then we talk about our bonus tip of using blank layouts to loop through records and do our utility work instead of the old developer standard of a util layout, which might contain every field. So FileMaker was evaluating all that and loading all that data. If you have any questions and you want to follow up with me, please feel free to contact me, info@keologic.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Keologic LLC, and you can also go to our website at keologic.com. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the question panel down below, and our moderators should be filtering those questions out now, and I should start to get some and give you some answers. John, I'm going to hand the torch back to you.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for going through that. And for all of us, apologize for the sonic problems we had earlier in the broadcast. We're not sure what caused them, but we do apologize for them. So while we're waiting for your questions, I just wanted to put up again the information for our next seminar, which is going to be in January the 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The presenter will be IT Solutions in Philadelphia, and the topic will be Playing Nicely with Others, FileMaker and Content Management Systems. And I think this could be a very valuable presentation for those of you who would like to know more about how FileMaker can play with third-party applications. Should be a very, very interesting topic. Now, we did receive some questions, and Tim, I'm going to present them to you as we go here. So let me start off with a couple that came in during the session. One question was, could you re-explain the idea of the short-circuiting? People have asked questions about, does the order of precedence matter if the two equations are fairly similar, or is that more driven by when the two equation points are very different?
Yes. Okay. So order of precedence is different in this case. Order of precedence is what order calculations are evaluated in, meaning we do multiplication first, then division, then we do addition, and then subtraction. And before any of that, we do what's inside parentheses. What FileMaker is doing is, as it goes through the order of precedence, if it sees some logic and it knows it can take a shortcut, it will try to do that. In this case, we were using an AND function. One of the rules, one of the great ones my children love to play games with, is multiplication by 0. I can multiply 1,000,000 times a 0 in my head. It's 0. So they have learned that they can short circuit and not have to work out and do the math, because they know anything times 0 is 0. So if it's 0 times 1 plus 5 plus 8 inside parentheses, they don't have to do that math first, because they know 0 times that will always be 0. And that's exactly what the FileMaker Pro math engine knows how to do. It looks at logical functions and, or, and so on, and it evaluates as it goes across those. It says, hey, 0 ANDed, I don't have to see what it's ANDed with. I know it's going to be 0, or 1, or it's always going to be 1, because anything ORed with 1 is 1. So what you want to do is put the faster predicates to the left of your equation so they evaluate first. And hopefully we won't have to do the slow predicates as often, and that can speed things up. So that's what I was trying to drive home with that presentation.
Okay, thank you. Now, Tim, I got another question here. Is in the example of breaking data into tables to speed up performance, such as the example you showed where there was a lot of content and it was slowing down list views, is there a limit to how many tables you can break into, or is that essentially unlimited?
I don't know of a physical limit, number of relationships you can have in a file. I'm sure there's probably one, but I don't think it's a practical limit. I've seen tables chopped up where we've gone into clients and they literally have 1,200 fields in one table. And what they're doing is they have 20 forms in the database, and they just place all the fields for every form in the same table, and they just go to a layout that shows the 30 fields that are relevant to the form they're filling out, and they never even fill out the other forms. So we would break those up so that each form had its own table with a one-to-one relation to the primary record. In this case, I believe it was students. And so then they have one student record, and they have a table for this form, a table for that form, a table for this form. And even if they fill out multiple ones for one student, when you load the student record, you're not having to load all that data related to the forms every time you view a list of students. So I don't know of a practical limit. I've seen it done as many as 50 or 60 breakouts, and there's a lot of great resources on doing this online. In the MySQL, Oracle, SQL world, this is called normalization, and it also applies to FileMaker Pro. It makes for nice schemas, and it works well. There's some great pages on Wikipedia about normalization, and I would suggest people look that up and give a read.
Thank you, Tim. There's another question that's come up now from a number of people is, are the sample files going to be available for download?
Yes. Yes, they are. I will be making blog posts to our new website. We're just getting the site live today, and I will post all 3 of the demo files to that website, to the blog, and we should also probably have links from the FM Academy site. So by the end of the week, check the www.keologic.com site and the blog tab, and you should be able to download these demo files. I'll leave them out there completely for you.
Okay. Tim, there's another question here. That is, if the field is on the layout, but the window size is shrunk, so the field is not visible, is this as fast as not having the field on the layout?
I would have to test that to be 100% sure, but I do believe it is. I think it's similar if it's an unstored field is what I'm referring to, so it doesn't have to evaluate that unstored field. I believe being off screen is the same as being buried under a tab because it's not being drawn on screen, so FileMaker Pro doesn't need to render that data. But I would have to test that to be sure. That's a good question. I don't have a 100% answer for that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Does it help to use a freeze window even if you're using a blank layout for looping purposes?
I believe the freeze window script step has been deprecated because of that. I think so. Again, I would have to test that 100%. I know Mark Richmond did some research on his last DevCon presentation on that topic. I would have to go back to those slides and verify that. I'm still in the habit of using freeze windows if there's any data displayed so the user doesn't perceive screen flicker. It's more for a clean UI for me now that I use blank layouts for all my looping scripts.
Okay. Let's see. There's another question here. How do these tips relate to using FileMaker Go?
With FileMaker Go, these tips are even more important because typically when you're working with FileMaker Go, you're dealing with a very slow device, an iPad, iPhone compared to a high-powered desktop computer, and you're also generally dealing with a very throttled network connection, 3G, Wi-Fi, roaming Wi-Fi at Starbucks. So the more you can do to reduce the amount of data being sent to the user, displaying only the information necessary to the user while they're using the Go application, the faster and better their experience will be. And you definitely don't want them doing some of these complex calculations on those devices, so you really want to make sure you're using server-side scripts and things like that to do the heavy lifting. But the more you depend on Go, the more you have to think about performance.
Does a single file versus a multi-file solution affect these kinds of design performance issues?
This is something I actually have been testing and working and reviewing, and I have found that multi-file solutions versus single-file solutions, I am finding no performance difference between them. They work just the same. This goes for separation models, and it works great. So no, I don't find any performance difference between multi-file or single files. It's purely a design decision of the developer about how they how they want to lay out their system.
Okay, and the final last question is, how does SSL security affect this, especially in, say, a cloud computing environment?
Okay, SSL is secure socket layers, is the encryption that can be turned on between FileMaker server and the client application, and it's turned on within the server. It's generally thought to put a 10 to 15% performance hit on your solution, but that performance hit is mostly at the CPU level, the processing, the encrypting of the packets, and the decrypting of the packets. It doesn't add a lot to the actual transmission of the packets and the amount of data, and that tends to be what slows down connections. The more data you send, the longer it takes to send it. Typically servers have lots of excess CPU power that they can encrypt these packets and send them with. And if you're working in a cloud environment, I would not recommend doing it without SSL turned on your server. You have options for security. Let's use them. Let's keep our databases safe. So small as 10%.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Thanks for answering those questions. I'd like to just review, in front of you is a slide showing all of the members of the FM Academy, and very importantly, down at the bottom is the link to the FM Academy website, so it's www.filemakeracademy.com. And as you can see, there's a number of excellent companies here. There's 7 companies covering most of the regions of the country. And if you aren't in one of these regions and would like further information, we would be glad to play host for that. At the bottom of the slide, you can see there's info@keologic.com. Feel free to send us an email about any one of the companies or any questions you might have, and we'll make sure that it's routed to the right people. Once again, everybody, thank you very much for your time. And I know it's a holiday time, and everyone's quite busy. We wish you the very best for the holidays. Tim, do you have any other comments? Nope, sounds like not. Well, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Sorry.